Jessica's life in the suburbs appeared flawless. Every morning, her husband, Ian, would kiss her goodbye before leaving for work, a ritual that had always comforted her. Their lives were seemingly perfect, filled with dinner parties and social gatherings where laughter flowed as freely as the wine. Lately, however, Ian had been acting strangely. It all started when Ian began spending more time in the attic with his friends. The attic had always been a storage space filled with dusty boxes and old furniture. But now, it was where Ian and his friends gathered regularly, a place that increasingly drew Ian away from Jessica. Jessica, curious but trusting, didn't pry. But one evening, Ian invited her to join them in the attic. The room, usually filled with dusty old boxes and tools, felt different that night, charged with an unfamiliar, almost ominous energy. The men's eyes lingered on her in a way that made her uneasy, their conversations carrying an undercurrent of something she couldn't quite place. Jessica brushed off her feelings as mere imagination, but the sensation left her unsettled. In the bedroom, she noticed a shift in Ian's behavior. He became more dominant, exploring boundaries they had never crossed before. His whispered suggestions, laced with new and darker desires, intrigued her even as they unsettled her. Jessica found herself caught between resisting and embracing this new side of her husband. One weekend, Ian organized a poker night in the attic and asked Jessica to serve drinks and snacks. What had initially felt like a simple task quickly became uncomfortable. The men's eyes followed her every move. Their casual touches lingered longer than they should, and their compliments bordered on suggestive. Ian watched with a strange satisfaction in his eyes, a silent participant in a game that Jessica was beginning to understand, but could not yet fully grasp. After the poker game, Ian confessed his fantasies to Jessica, involving her with other men. Initially, she felt anger and betrayal, but Ian's persistence and the allure of the taboo began to break down her resistance. Jessica, torn between disgust and curiosity, found herself drawn into Ian's world of dark desires. Ian introduced her to online forums about cuckolding and hot wifing, where Jessica's emotions swung between horror and fascination. Slowly, these stories awakened cravings she had never acknowledged before. The thrill of the forbidden became impossible to resist. One night, Ian suggested a meeting in the attic with his friends, promising it would be just a fantasy discussion. The night of the meeting, the attic felt like a gateway to a darker world. Ian's friends arrived, their intentions barely concealed as they circled Jessica like predators. As the evening progressed, the conversation became explicit, and Ian encouraged Jessica to share her fantasies. Initially hesitant, Jessica gradually opened up, her shyness fading as the atmosphere grew thick with anticipation. Ian suggested a game of truth or dare, which quickly escalated into something far more provocative. With each dare, Jessica's actions became bolder, her heart pounding as the men's eyes lingered on her. The night left her reeling, and when the men finally left, Jessica confronted Ian, demanding answers. His explanation of trust and exploration only deepened her confusion, leaving her torn between the thrill of the night and the betrayal she felt. Despite her reservations, Jessica found herself drawn back to the idea of another gathering. The allure of the forbidden was too strong to resist, and she agreed to another meeting, despite her growing fears. The third gathering was the most intense yet. Jessica dressed carefully, knowing this night would push her even further. As the men's touches grew more aggressive, Jessica felt herself being pulled into a world where boundaries were shattered and desires laid bare. Ian watched, a silent participant, as Jessica's trust in him was tested to its limits. She found herself lost in a chaotic blend of pleasure and pain, with the lines between reality and fantasy blurring until they were almost indistinguishable. She was caught between shame and anger, unsure of how to move forward. The once safe confines of her home now felt tainted, and the attic, once a place of storage, had become a symbol of her lost innocence and trust. Despite her growing unease, Jessica found herself drawn back to the attic. Ian suggested another gathering, promising it would be more controlled this time. Against her better judgment, Jessica agreed. The allure of the forbidden and the fear of losing Ian entirely overpowered her doubts. The second gathering was even more intense. The men, emboldened by the previous night's events, were more aggressive in their advances. This time, Jessica was not just a participant, but the focus of their desires. Ian watched with a mix of pride and possessiveness as the men took turns, pushing Jessica's boundaries even further. Her protests were weaker, her resistance nearly gone, as the night spiraled into a blur of sensations that left her confused and overwhelmed. After that night, Jessica's world began to crumble. The once solid foundation of her marriage was now a fragile facade, barely holding together under the weight of what had happened. The structure Ian had promised was a flimsy barrier against the intensity of their desires. Jessica's world narrowed to the sensations coursing through her body, each touch, each command pushing her further. The men's dominance was absolute, their enjoyment of her submission evident in every action. After the men left, Jessica and Ian's argument reignited with fury. The emotional aftermath of the night's events left her raw and exposed. Ian's reassurances did little to soothe her, his pleasure in her submission a constant source of conflict. Jessica felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her love for Ian both a beacon and a curse. In the days that followed, Jessica delved deeper into the online world of forbidden desires. She began to withdraw, spending more time alone, trying to process the emotions she couldn't escape. Ian's attempts to console her only made things worse, as they reminded her of the role he had played in her degradation. In her darkest moments, Jessica turned to the internet, seeking solace in online forums where others had shared similar experiences. She found comfort in the stories of other women who had been manipulated and betrayed, their confessions a lifeline in her storm of emotions. Slowly, she began to rebuild her shattered self-esteem, realizing that she needed to reclaim her life. Jessica eventually made the difficult decision to leave Ian. She moved into a small apartment across town, determined to start over. The separation was painful, but it was necessary for her healing. As she began to rediscover herself, she met Ian, a kind and understanding man who respected her boundaries and helped her heal. With Ian's support, Jessica confronted Ian one final time, seeking closure and accountability. The confrontation was emotionally charged, but it gave Jessica the empowerment she needed to move forward. She found purpose in helping others who had been through similar betrayals, sharing her story openly and becoming an advocate for survivors of manipulation and abuse. Jessica's journey from betrayal to empowerment became a beacon of hope for others. She founded an organization dedicated to supporting survivors and continued to share her story, inspiring countless others to reclaim their lives.